Hi, and welcome to the College of Liberal Arts Showcase. I'm Jordan Kelman, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. On this show, we will be interviewing some of the most fascinating, smart, and influential people in our area, drawn from the faculty of the College of Liberal Arts and beyond. They'll be sharing their insights and the latest research and knowledge from the social sciences and humanities to enrich the lives of a new generation of students and the community around us. Next week, we'll be interviewing Dr. Barry Onsele, who's done more to bring the culture, history, folklore, and language of the Cajun people to a worldwide audience than anyone else. But today, we have Associate Professor of History, John Troutman, who's a world-renowned musician and author of 2 interesting books, who'll be talking to us about his career and his aspirations and his musical endeavors on the show today. Come back in a few minutes and join us for Dr. John Troutman.
Hi, my name's Annalise Wakama. I'm a second-year graduate student in the history department, and I'm majoring in European history, minoring in American history, and it's academic history. I was a history major in undergrad, and honestly, I just have always kind of known that I wanted to study history. I always knew I wanted to pursue a PhD. It's called 505. It's quite a daunting class. A lot of people dread it, and it is a lot of work because you're producing basically your first project that you have researched on your own, and it's an independent project. It's not just a paper where you're writing about a topic. You are going into the archives, you're doing all of the research, and you're doing original research. I feel that for me, we have a group of professors that is, number one, really dedicated to their students, be the students undergraduate, graduate, or just, students at UL. They're not necessarily all history majors. And what I've learned is that these professors go out of their way to help their students. I absolutely would recommend history as a major, particularly if you're looking to pursue undergraduate education and do a graduate program. History is something that you have to be very passionate about. It can often be frustrating, but I would definitely encourage students to do it. The liberal arts are very often underappreciated, but we develop a lot of critical skills that can be used a lot of other places in the world, and the workforce, the professional world, and just these analytical and creative skills that are just important.
Welcome back to the Liberal Arts Showcase. I'm Jordan Kelman, Dean of Liberal Arts, the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and we're here today with Dr. John Troutman, award-winning musician, author, and associate professor of history. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Jordan.
John, so you majored in anthropology first, and then you went on to study American Indians and history. What attracted you to those topics?
It's a good question. One of the things that really is wonderful about liberal arts education is that it allows you to meander a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I certainly meandered for a while in college in the sense that I was looking for a way in which I could pursue my passions and figure out a way to kind of develop a profession from them. But the education also enabled me to identify new passions. When I began my freshman year in college, I saw that there were a number of requirements that I needed to take before I declared a major, and one of the options was to enroll in an anthropology class. I'd never heard of the word anthropology before. I came from a small town in Alabama, mm-hmm. but the description of the class sounded really interesting. And so I enrolled in the class that fall and just loved it. It's kind of broadly speaking the study of humans, from fossils of our ancestors to material culture, to the objects and the stuff that humans produce and the language that they produce to make meaning of their lives. And so all of those kind of aspects of that major really kind of excited me, and I continued to take more classes and eventually majored in anthropology. While I was an anthropology major, I began to take particular interest due to the professors in the department in American Indian history. And as a result of that, I began to take classes both in history and in anthropology to enable me to learn more about the history of Native peoples on the continent. That drew me towards an interdisciplinary master's degree in Arizona, where I studied with about 90% of the faculty who were Native and about half the students were Native, enabled me to kind of think about Native people and their history on this continent in a whole kind of new manner. And from there, I began to realize that history really seemed a field that I was drawn to. I began to think about teaching history classes at the college level, and so I enrolled in a history PhD program at the University of Texas.
It's a fascinating story. So you also have a parallel career as a musician. Can you tell me about that, how you got into playing music and how it's related to your interest in Native American
Absolutely.
culture?
You know, I had played music since I was a teenager in bands, various sorts of bands, rock bands, country bands, bluegrass bands, and so forth. And it took me a while to realize that I could actually kind of fuse that life with my own kind of professional goals and my own career path in college and graduate school. And so eventually I began to think about music as it related to Native people. And I began to think about how music might provide us with some insight in terms of their various communities and how they kind of have navigated the politics that they engage in as Indian people. And I wasn't really sure if there was a relationship or not there, you know, in terms of whether music can produce political change or react to political challenges. But my professors encouraged me to explore that question. And not a whole lot of folks had written very much about it in the past. But as I continued to kind of delve into research interest related to music, then I found an entire world where music was in fact vitally important to Native communities and kind of managing the challenges that they endured with, you know, their relationship to the federal government, to state governments, and so forth. And that opened all sorts of windows for me in my brain as I began to think about, you know, ways that we can imagine that relationship between music history, ways in which we can kind of produce literature about that, and also ways in which we can engage our students to think in new ways about things that are so intimate to them, such as music, and how that relates to social change.
Excellent. So you've just published an award-winning book that brings together some of the threads of this history and your interests. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, what brought you to the topic, and what you've learned?
Sure. Excuse me. My most recent book is called Kika Kila, How the Hawaiian Steel Guitar Changed the Sound of Modern Music. And it's born out of this confluence of my own passion as a steel guitarist, and my kind of scholarly passions as well. I was playing steel guitar in Texas as a grad student while I was writing my dissertation. And I began to wonder about the history of that instrument. I knew that it had some sort of connection to Hawaii and to Native people in Hawaii, but I wasn't sure what was there. There wasn't a whole lot that we were aware of in terms of academics about that story. And so I just started to explore that a little bit. I began to visit archives, I began to read old newspapers, and I eventually began to speak to musicians, and in particular Hawaiian musicians in Hawaii. And I learned this fascinating story about an instrument that was essentially at first a modified instrument from a guitar that was developed at the time in which the Hawaiian people were being overthrown by Americans in the islands. So I began to wonder what the relationship was there between the development of this new music medium and the overthrow. And then I realized also that Hawaiians began traveling all over the world in the decades that followed, sharing their Hawaiian music through this instrument. And so the book kind of encapsulates a long history of the instrument and I think allows us to understand better these connections between music and politics and culture, and how Hawaiian people have in fact transformed musical traditions all over the world in consequence.
And are these topics that you also share with students in some of your classes at the university?
I teach classes on music history about once every 3 or 4 semesters at UL, and it's a really fun class. I teach sometimes upper division seminar classes and sometimes larger classes where more undergraduates can enroll. And what I've learned is that every student at UL, everyone in the world loves music. There's some sort of music genre or musical artist that people are drawn to if they're not performers themselves. And so all the students who come into these classes are very passionate from the very beginning, and they want to try to figure out how to root that passion in a sense of understanding of the history of the music that they love. So those classes enable us to provide them with an opportunity to study the histories of the musics that are so important to them, and we just have a ball. And I learned so much from them. I'm so over the hill when it comes to music these days, but they just bring me the most cutting edge stuff all the time. So it's a lot of fun for me as a professor.
That's great. And I gather that your book has received quite a lot of attention. Are you sharing this knowledge in other places besides Louisiana?
I am. I've had the opportunity to travel to several different universities to provide book talks where I introduce the topic and talk a little bit about the process of writing the book. And in fact, tomorrow I'm traveling to Hawaii to give 4 talks on the book. It's been quite an honor for me to have that opportunity and to receive the feedback that I have, in particular from the Hawaiian musicians whom I worked with in putting the book together. I really owe any of the success of the book to their willingness and their generosity to sit down with me and to tell stories, or talk story, as they say in Hawaii, about this instrument.
And would you say that the process of writing this book has allowed you to get a deeper insight into another culture that perhaps you didn't have before?
Absolutely. One of the interesting and challenging elements of teaching about American Indian history, for example, is the fact that we're actually talking about, over 500, 600 in some cases, and more communities that self-identify as individually discrete Native populations with very specific histories, languages, customs, relationships to the federal government and their local governments. And so, one of our challenges is to try to kind of dig into some of those communities in order for students to learn more about kind of a very local, very intimate history of a people. Hawaii was a topic I knew very little about. So this book enabled me to spend about 8 years. That was the process it took to write this book, learning about their very specific and extraordinary history.
Excellent. We're talking to John Troutman today, who is telling us all about his intellectual history and the amazing insights that he's bringing to students at UL and to the broader community and the nation about our own musical history. We're going to take a brief break, and then we're going to hear more from John about his career and his other interests. Come back soon.
My name is Abigail Scott. I go by both Abby and Abigail. I'm actually a double major in history and in French. I chose history as my major because I just figured life is short, just do what you love, and if you love what you do, then you truly don't work a day in your life. My favorite professor hands down, is Dr. Robin Herman. He's a wonderful man. He is very kind, very funny. It's never a dull day in his class. We learn a lot of things, and he's teaching me a lot of skills of how to go out and how to read these primary sources like law interviews and all that, and how to comprehend them in a modern day setting, more or less. My favorite thing about the history department is how friendly everybody is. I mean, we're constantly doing fun things, and every freshman I tell, I'm like, do what you love. I'm like, you can't do college for your parents or for your grandparents or for your dog or your cat or your bird. I'm like, you have to do college for you, because if you don't do it for you, you're not going to enjoy it. You're just going to dread coming to school every day. I am always excited to come to school. I mean, the work's rough, but I just love what I'm learning, and I'm just excited to come here every day.
Welcome back to the College of Liberal Arts Showcase. We're here today with Dr. John Troutman, award-winning musician, author, and associate professor of history at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Welcome back, John.
Thanks, Jordan.
So John, one of the most interesting programs that you've helped develop here at the university is the Museum on the Move program. Can you tell us a little bit about what was behind that?
Absolutely. One of the strengths of our history department is the public history program that we've developed for graduate students and that we're developing for undergraduates as well. Public history simply means we're training students to take on roles in museums or in historic preservation organizations in areas where they're really connecting directly with the public, not just within an academic context, but speaking from a very broad perspective. So I guess about 5 or 6 years ago, I was attending a public history conference with 2 of our faculty members, Bob Carricker and Chad Parker, and we saw a presentation on this concept of a mobile museum that was in place elsewhere in the country. And we began to think about this and think about how it might serve our students. And so Bob was the department head at the time, and he figured out a way to kind of make all of this work, to put everything in line for us to move forward with it. We were very lucky in the sense that one of our former students, who unfortunately had passed away, Jamie Gilbo, bequeathed to our department a sum of money with his mother, Thelma, to enable us to pursue projects like this in the realm of public history. So we had some funds available, and we decided that a mobile museum laboratory might be the best way in which we kind of kick off this new chapter for our public history program. So as we began to brainstorm on this idea of a mobile museum, I think we all reached immediate consensus that we should do this in an old Airstream trailer. Because Airstreams are so iconic. I mean, they really reveal this very fun, kind of colorful and fun story about the United States during the mid-20th century, when these highways, these new interstates were enabling people in the nation to travel all over the country, and Airstreams became kind of the iconic symbol of that freedom and that opportunity. And so we found an old Airstream, a 1954 26-foot long Airstream outside of Birmingham, Alabama. We had it appraised. We had the price adjusted in consequence of the appraisal, and we picked it up. And we drove it. Chad and I picked it up and brought it back to Lafayette. And we began to think about, okay, how can we build this into something that the university can benefit from and the community can benefit from? So we began reaching out to other faculty members. We turned to Corey Saft, for example, in industrial design, and Corey was really intrigued by this idea of how do you turn this very lived-in Airstream with, a shower and with furniture and a kitchen and a range and everything. How do you turn that into a museum space where we need as much space as possible for people to come in and explore the exhibits that our students would build within it? And so Corey and his students in a summer session developed some incredible prototypes that would provide us with some guidance in how to proceed in transforming the trailer into something that we could use and reuse over the years. From there, we turned to local contractor John Steinman of John Frederick Construction, who immediately understood our goals, and he did an incredible job of transforming the interior of the trailer into an open space for us to build exhibits within. And so he gutted the trailer, replaced the floor. It had an electrician install the power that we needed to power the lights and other kind of audio video equipment that will run inside the trailer. And we did all of that in the fall semester of our inaugural year with Museum on the Move, at the same time that a grad student class of about 12 students hatched kind of a plan to build our inaugural exhibit. I mean, from scratch. They came in with an idea that Mary Farmer Kaiser, another of our professors, had come up with for this inaugural exhibit, where we would develop an exhibit on the history of Louisiana women in this trailer that we would then travel around the state. So Mary, in the spring semester, had taught students a course on Louisiana women with the concept in mind that the students would develop ideas that would turn into this eventual exhibit. So the undergrads and some grad students from her class joined in. We tried to bring as many partners from the university in as possible, and certainly from our department. In the fall semester of that year, our grad students just kind of jumped into it as we were kind of gutting the trailer frantically in preparation for a December opening. And they figured out how to build, in very short order, a really wonderful exhibition. And what's so much fun about Museum on the Move is that for students who are planning to develop careers in museums, and our program is really placing a great number of our students into excellent entry positions in the museum world, they learned in the course of this class how to identify concepts and themes for an exhibit, a significant exhibit, it's a medium-sized exhibit, how to write the script for all the labels, the outline for the exhibit, how to write labels, which when you're trying to get big ideas into 50 words or less becomes quite a challenge in itself. They learned how to acquire objects, how to secure permissions for objects and images. They learned how to design these exhibits through graphic design techniques. They learned how to manage visitor flow into an exhibit space. They learned how to reach out to the media to promote the opening. They reached out to local schools. They developed educational materials that tied in with the state curriculum standards for 6th and 8th grade. They did it all. I mean, if they were working in a small or medium-sized museum, they'd be doing all of these things because museums are staffed with usually few people. And so they learned in one semester some incredibly important skills, all applied skills in this class. And we launched the exhibit, the first exhibit at the end of that semester, and it was just amazing. We had a huge response from the community. They loved it. We started taking it to festival. We took it to local schools. We took it to community organizations. We took it to professional meetings all over the place, and and libraries as well here in the Acadiana area especially. I mean, the response has been amazing, and our most recent exhibit is on the history of oil in Louisiana, which was also a really wonderful experience for us.
Would you say that this experience for you gave you a new insight, a new interest in public history and museums and what goes into museum exhibitions behind the scenes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I learned so much from this experience. I was interested in museum work, and I'd kind of dabbled in museum work a little bit before, but this experience working with students, both in the Museum on the Move classes and also in our other public history courses on museums, really kind of enabled me to kind of hone my own chops in terms of doing this work. Because it's one thing to write, an academic book with 1,000 footnotes at the end of it, and your readership is typically like somewhat limited, with academic history books. But, figuring out how to engage multiple audiences in and outside of academia is a whole different challenge. And so this has really provided me with a great experience. And the students who come in also have very specific interest in mind in terms of themes that are important to them that they want to include in these exhibits. So the collaborative work was really attractive to me as well.
Excellent. And I gather that you will be pursuing a new opportunity, in fact, working yourself at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I recently accepted a position at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, where I'm working as the curator of music for that museum. And so I'm certainly applying a lot of the skills from my experience here at UL working with these students to that new position. It's an exciting job. It's a very different kind of job, and so I'm learning that as I kind of make my way forward. But it's going to be a lot of fun, I think, and different and exciting.
What kinds of things do you hope to bring to a much wider audience now? The whole American public is your
Well, certainly I'm bringing
audience.
Louisiana music up there. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. The museum maintains about 6,000 musical instruments right now, and they're instruments from kind of all genres of American music and from other parts of the world as well. But they also have holes, they have gaps in their collections, and the collections are national collections that the Smithsonian maintains in perpetuity for future generations to enjoy, to research, and to view through exhibitions at the museum. And so one of my jobs is to make sure that our musical collections really represents the diversity of the American population. We need more of South Louisiana in those collections, and so I'm excited to build that collection.
Excellent. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, John. Thank you for joining us today. We have been speaking with Professor John Troutman today on the Liberal Arts Showcase, and we hope you'll join us next time when we'll be interviewing Dr. Barry Onsele. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Jordan.